think I'm
No
starting
response yet.
Yeah,
starting.
we can do it.
Yeah.
As we've learned in this article, we can do anything. Hi, everyone. Welcome. If you are here for a talk about tenacity, the future of how we get around, you're in the right place. I'm Beth Spotswood. I'm the digital editor of Alta magazine, and I'm going to wait. I can see our audience filling in, so I'm going to give it a few more seconds. As we do that, I will just get rid of some bookkeeping from the get-go. I am so excited today to welcome Dezso Molnar, whose passion for creating street legal flying cars was the subject of a, if I do say so, fascinating Alta Journal feature by journalist Adam Fisher, who also joins us today. If you're unfamiliar with Alta, we are a quarterly magazine focused on California and the West. And this article was so exciting that we kind of wanted to do a discussion around it. By way of brief introduction, Dezso led a record-holding land speed team, was an ex-prize judge, and helped create the private manned space shuttle industry. He's a pilot, a flight engineer, a mechanic. He's also a musician, and he's now forming the Flying Car Racing League and building a solar electric flying race car, which is the subject of Adam's article. Adam is the author of Valley of Genius, and he writes for Wired, the New York Times Magazine, and now we are very proud to say Alta. I'm going to interview these two for about 25 minutes, and then we're going to get to your questions. So please use, there's a Q&A button or there's a chat feature, and pose any questions you have for either of our guests today. I will try and get to as many of those as I can at the end of our discussion. Don't worry though, we are recording this conversation, and if you've registered for this, I've got your email. I'm going to shoot you an email this afternoon with a recording of this, as well as links to Adam's article, anything that we discussed today, Adam's great book, Valley of Genius, that you can buy on Bookshop. So we'll cover all of that. And with that, we're gonna kind of get started. I'm particularly curious, Adam and Dezso, how do you two know each other?
Well, we met at a party. Actually, it was a book party. That's the last place I thought I'd run into someone so unlike me.
Whose
Well,
book?
Adam was the only person there who would speak to me. That's why I was.
What was the book?
It was Alpha Girls, right?
Yeah, friend of ours wrote, mutual
Julian
friend
Guthrie.
of ours wrote Alpha Girls, and the room was filled with Alpha Girls, and but I would call them women. And they were looking to network with other alpha women, and yeah, I felt pretty invisible too. And then I was like, who's that long-haired, crazy-looking guy in the corner? I'll just go talk to him. And it turned out to be Dezso.
Did you ever kind of think that one day when you meet someone at a book party that you would end up spending New Year's Day flying through the desert, trying to track a one-day flying car? How did you go from?
I have a nose for these guys. I knew he was interesting. In fact, we just, casually met at a party, and then I reached out and said, "Hey, I'm going to a very fancy party down in Silicon Valley. I bet that's more your kind of party because, well, for reasons that will soon become clear." And that's where we ran into your publisher, Will Hurst, at a picnic table.
That's right. So I'll clarify a little bit. So what happened with the initially, you can create luck, and you position yourself to do that where there's opportunities. So I went to see Julian because I love her and I wanted to support her book launch. And I wasn't, like I said, I didn't feel particularly welcome at the event except for by her, and she was completely busy. And then Adam and I hit it off, and he wanted to do a story for another magazine. So I agreed to be involved in that a little bit. And then so I reached out to Adam. I said, "Hey, what's happening?" And he introduced me around to some people. It was John Markoff. Is that his name?
It was John Markov's birthday party, another Alta contributor who has an excellent article in this current Alta that we're in. And yeah, I mean, he's a very well-connected guy in Silicon Valley, and a lot of people were there that we ended up meeting, like Stuart Brand,
Paul
Sappho.
Sappho.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Adam suggested I sit next to Paul at a picnic table. And then, so I did, and I was just, it was awkward, but not in a mean way. It was just, I'm sitting there with Stuart Brand and Paul Sappho. And then I feel this elbow in my ribs, and Adam's saying, hey, that's Mr. Hurst sitting across from you. And so I was, okay. And so I just was quiet, and everyone was very kind. And then Mr. Hurst said, hello, what are you doing? I think I butted in on the conversation a little bit. And I said, I'm starting a flying car racing. I'm starting to build flying cars to race because that will drive development. And he instantly said, that's correct. I want a story about this guy in my magazine. And then I turned to Adam, who I knew did not want to do magazine articles anymore because he's a book writer, brilliant. And I read his book by then. I'd read everything else. And I said, hey, sometimes decisions are made for you. And that was the beginning of a year and a half, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. One does not turn down a personal request from, William Randolph Hearst Jr., the 10th, whatever he is, it's just like, yes, sir.
Well, I'm so glad you both said yes.
Yeah. And so it took about it took about a year and a half to before I finally thought, okay, now this is a worthy story for Alta. So.
Right, that's true. And again, Mr. Hurst he grasped it faster than anybody, which was really compelling. So, and then Adam's right, because there was obviously the challenge here was like, hey, this thing doesn't fly. And so what I needed to do was create enough of a scenario and enough justification for what we're doing. There's a lot of synonyms between other aircraft that I have that would make a compelling argument that this machine has the capacity to do what I want it to do, because ultimately it's a very honest story in that respect. There's nothing, it's perceived as a futuristic thing, but it's also the probabilities are very high. I think that it was enough. It was worthy of a story at that point.
I want to get to the probability of flying cars being a real thing, but can you just, for those who haven't read this article yet, can you briefly describe the Streetwing, what makes it different from other attempts at flying cars?
That's for me or for Adam?
For you.
Well, very simply, it's the rule in aircraft design is that airframes follow power plants. So if there's a good engine, then people will build airplanes to fit those engines. I built a flying motorcycle about 15, 20 years ago, and it was very complicated because of all the mechanisms that I needed to run between the engine and the transmission. The idea is that now we have, there's a ubiquitous amount of electric motors. Battery weights are 1/10 of what they used to be starting in the 1990s. And so a person's body weight's always the same. We all weigh about 180 pounds. And so the motors exist so that you can make a wheel turn from 0 RPMs to fast, and you can spin a propeller or whatever you want to do. So now the power plants exist that are very compelling, that will allow us to build flying cars that are extremely reliable, better than it's ever been. And also my approach is that I only want to, starting with, I'm just going to position it in racing. There's never been a flying car race. There has been every person that's played tennis or wearing a pair of Speedos or raced a car. They all came out of competition. And so by positioning a competition, it means everything's good enough and let's just run with them.
Adam, had you ever been in a flying car before?
Me?
No.
Adam.
Oh,
no, I've never been in a flying car before. But that's why I'm a writer.
But you got to take, as kind of you began this journey. So for those who haven't read the article, you guys kind of made a deal that you would meet on New Year's Day and test out the Streetwing, that by New Year's Day, you were going to meet at a location we're not allowed to know, in the middle of the Mojave Desert, and get this thing on the road. But you began by flying in a gyrocycle?
Gyroplane, yeah.
Gyroplane. What was that experience like for you, Adam, as a first time?
So that was amazing. I've always wanted to go out to the desert there. What's the desert?
El
What's that?
Mirage Dry Lake.
Yeah, El Mirage. It's famous in like in the engineering world as the place where you go to test out crazy vehicles, usually land speed type things. But and it did not disappoint. We were at the kind of far edge of this dry lake, and on the shores of this dry lake is this incredible Mad Max compound that's totally devoted to this tiny subculture of gyroplane enthusiasts, and that's where Dezso has his personal hangar and personal gyroplane. And the gyroplane, just to be clear, it's a kind of helicopter looking thing that has some important technical differences from a helicopter, but more important for our story was the basis for Dezso's first flying car. And that first flying car is not a two-person flying car. So we took up this gyroplane just so I could see the future flying car racing lead race course and just get a taste of it. And yeah, you're sitting in this thing that looks way more like a bicycle than an airplane, although it has a motor, and this one has this rotor. And we had to jump start it, rev it up, start moving down, across the runway in front of the dry lake. And before I knew it, we were flying. I didn't even realize until I looked down and saw my shadow, and all of my shadow, not connected to, the bottom of the plane. And it was like a magic carpet ride. And then, we buzzed around and took most of the proposed course of the race, the future, inaugural flying car racing league race, and again landed, and it was so seamless that that I barely noticed, and kind of drove back home under propeller power, but that's actually a fairly efficient way to go, especially when you're on a super flat surface like the dry lake. So in a sense, yeah, I did fly in a flying car, but this is not the flying car that we're talking about in this story. We're talking about the
Streetwing,
much more advanced thing called the Streetwing.
And the Streetwing does not yet fly.
That's correct. The Streetwing, what we showed that day was effectively an overstimulated piece of sculpture. So when in the process of building an aircraft or a car, when somebody designs a new car in Detroit, they take a lump of clay, literally clay, and they sculpt it out of clay. And once they look at it and they say they like that, then they use that as the foundation for all the molds and all the presses that they use to make the body panels. So what we did was, over the past 5 years or so, I've been working to decide what the shape of this vehicle will be based on, how the ergonomics, how I fit in it, how people are going to use it, how it will fly, and so we made that mold. And in order to to help foster some, the story, I put two motors in it. I put a 60 horsepower motor to run a propeller. So this thing would be it's basically a 100 horsepower piece of clay. And so we put a motor in the back that would run a propeller, and I demonstrated that for Adam, and it was clear that it works, and that's the concept of how it will be able to fly through the air. And then I also have a separate motor that would drive it down the road. And then immediately after we landed in the gyroplane, we shuttled ourselves over, and I jumped in the cars basically immediately, and we just hit the road. And it basically, what was also funny was your photographer was very quick to advise me. He said, as soon as the police see you, they're going to arrest you. And I thought, well, that's interesting that the photographer showed up today. He's the only one getting paid. And he's advising me that I didn't know that I would need a license plate. But we did have a license plate, and I wanted to demonstrate that to the crew that there is a way to get these things on the street, and it's actually much more challenging to do that. And I appreciate all the photos he took, but like I said, I also appreciate the fact that he brought up that general level of skepticism. Most people will always tell me that you can't do any of this, it's all illegal. But I have a degree in aeronautics. I've studied all the rules as far as what can go on the road, what can go on in the air, and we thread that needle. And I wanted to demonstrate that. So the Streetwing doesn't fly, but it will, because I'm going to make one fly.
That is awesome. Dezso, you mentioned that you did, once this article came out, you took a loose poll among your friends of how they reacted to it. And you seemed particularly pleased that their reaction wasn't focused on the technical aspects of the car, but rather of your tenacity, of this will to make things happen. The Streetwing will fly because you're going to make it fly.
It wasn't my interest wasn't in my tenacity. It was the reaction. It was what Adam delivered to the reader. So
was that
my
your intention, Adam?
Yeah, believe it or not, there are plenty of flying car projects. Some of them even arguably farther along than Dezso's, although Dezso might actually be first to get to market with something you can buy. But my real interest was not in the flying car per se, although I find it fascinating. It was in Dezso, because all these other projects are these kind of billionaire funded skunk works with, they're a little boring because they're a little all about how important they are, which I think is untested. But Dezso, here's a guy who basically did a flying car as his COVID project. And, the thing that I wrote about is kind of a rolling prototype, not in the car that'll fly. But I was convinced that after a year of talking to him that he was going to make a flying car, and do it soon. In fact, I think that you've got fabricators working on the wings right now, right, Dezso?
The structural engineering the structural engineering design for the removable wings started last Friday, and that's effectively applying existing technology and design. So it's very very simple allocation. But what it does is it gives us an exact parts list of exactly how much fabric we need, how much this thing's going to weigh. It gives us all the exact data from a very reliable structural engineering firm. And so it's a very, I'm wearing this ring because I've stopped being a mechanic. No reasonable mechanic would wear a ring because he'd rip his finger off. So this reminds me that I'm now in this next mode of, let's get this thing built and let's allocate resources to it. So it's gonna go. Yeah.
So Dezso basically did this as a one-man band, as a COVID project, and he's able to do what billionaire funded large corporate or fairly large organizations can't seem to do. And that's what's so interesting. And it's because he's incredibly skilled, of course, but also incredibly tenacious. It's really an expression of his personality and will to make something happen. And that, I think, is fascinating.
Well, I appreciate that what you said, Adam, but I also want to go back and say that as a deliverable, because your story is its own deliverable, that what I appreciated was that people were entertained with the story. And as a racing organization, that's what you create. You create stories, and that's where I want to begin. And it was that. So Beth, out to answer your question, that's why I like people's response.
So, and eventually, as they discuss in the article, when the Streetwing is ready to fly, one day there will be a flying car race league. But before that happens, can you talk a little bit, Will Hurst, of the picnic table at the party, is curious what qualifications a person might need to pilot or drive a flying car. Or will autopilot just take you where you want to go, like an Uber computer? Sub question, has the FAA entered the discussion? And finally, are you taking orders?
So starting from the back, taking orders, not necessarily. So there's a lot of tombstones attached to people who have started aircraft companies by beginning to take orders prior to completing a vehicle. I can send you a large list of that. So that's often a failure model of a business. The FAA is more than happy to have people build and manufacture and sell aircraft. I'm positioning this one in the experimental division. There's a very successful companies like Rand's Aircraft, Sonex, and they're successful businesses that do not require certification, long-term challenges of manufacturing and flying planes. It's literally 3 sheets of paper that you have to fill out, and you get to fly your own airplane. People do it every single day. There's new aircraft that start flying that are in the experimental mode. So that's the position that I'm going into, because it's very, very easy to get into that. The other questions, if you can remind me, there was.
What kind of qualifications does someone need to be licensed?
So as Adam was in this particular area, a person doesn't require a pilot's license to fly in that area. I positioned us in a Class E airspace, which is for the first race. So if a person, an ultralight, it would be, you can make an ultralight, which is a specific category of aircraft. You can make an ultralight flying car, and a person would be able to fly on this specific course without a pilot's license. That's a part 103 in your FAA manual will describe that. It's literally 1 page of paper. It's 2 sides of it. That's the rules for a person, and it doesn't require a pilot's license. And it would be very safe. It's the safest place we would be able to do that. I'm trying to make it available for a lot of people to be involved in it. And so that's that situation. And beyond that, as a racing team, the person that flies it doesn't have to be the person that drives it. I want a lot of availability for creativity. So maybe someone says, hey, I really want to do this, but I'm not a pilot. Then get your pilot friend to do the flying part, and then we'll throw the driver in, and then you drive down the street, and that's the driver part. And then that's for the beginning of the racing. And then as it grows, it'll be more like the Tour de France, where we go from city to city, where people have, as the capabilities of these vehicles grow, then we'll be able to go from town to town. And now you're looking at something that it's not an annual event. It could be happening all the time. The other thing is that, back in the 30s, actually, Mr. Hurst would remember the first flight that was across the United States was done by the Vin Fizz. I think his grandfather was involved in a prize for that. And that's aircraft is currently in the Smithsonian. That was flown across the United States. And one of the reasons that so many people engaged with that vehicle was that every time the pilot would land, everyone would attack it and destroy it and rip the wings off and take home a souvenir. And so that was a very difficult way to manage a flying car race, because these people had to follow it in trains and rebuild them every night. And then the pilot, Galbraith Rogers, famously would crash, and he'd wind up in the hospital every day. It was really tragic, but he made it after 45 days or so. Right now, we have the selfie industrial complex, where people do not want to destroy your car. They just want to have a picture of a selfie next to it. So that little twitch in the way that people receive things will provide us the opportunity to grow from beyond this desert testing facility and start traveling. And once you're traveling, now you're not talking about, oh, what do I have to do to do my commute back and forth? How do I chain myself to that? My ambition is not to create something that will keep a person that's chained to their desk to go back and forth to their desk. Most people I've talked to my whole life, I always ask them, what do you want to do the most? Honestly. And they'll usually come up with some excuse why they can't do what they want, but I keep driving them. And generally, they always say they want to travel. And I said, well, why don't you? Why don't you become work on a cruise ship or something, or become a flight attendant, or, usually they have some excuse for it. But what I'm trying to do is enable people to travel, because it seems like they don't want to do that. It's not a war machine. It's a travel machine. It's a freedom machine. And I want to do it without making a mess. And so that's why the Streetwing is designed so that, unlike, a jetpack that burns a gallon a minute just to hold you off the ground, the Streetwing will be able to travel without using fuel. And I want to demonstrate that. And hopefully people will pull that in. And also the streamlining, aircraft are very lightweight. And so they're very efficient. And I want to drive that efficiency into the thought patterns of people that are literally still driving around in Model Ts. I don't care what, when I see a car on a freeway, it's a driver, a seat, a bunch of seats, and they're all empty. And it's the width of the road. You know, if you narrow that down, you lighten it up. That's what, it hasn't happened. I was going to say, like Rocky Mountain Institute, they say, look, cars are just too heavy. It's true. And things are not going to lighten up unless you pedal them or they fly. That will make vehicles lighter, and that will drive efficiencies, and that will drive the desirability of this stuff.
Wow, I'm feeling really guilty about
Did
my
I miss
car right now.
Well, the world is having we have a problem scheduled
We do.
environmentally. And so at what point do we jump in? And so taking orders, Mr. Hurst, I'd be happy to discuss your desire for an order. I heard you bought I think he's flying a 182 now. So that's great.
Dezso, can you talk a little bit about what you learned from Craig Breedlove and the Spirit of America, the land, that's the land speed record that you brought to this project?
Craig and I both learned a lot from each other. And I'll just say quickly that Craig knew more, he'd forgotten more than most people ever knew by the time we met, but I'll make it very simple. The most important thing I learned from Craig and working on that project was that if you're racing, when the words weather permitting are attached to your race, there's very little probability that you're going to have the chance of getting a television deal that works out or being able to schedule your sponsors to come out. So weather permitting, and that works also with Rocket Racing League, which I was a team member on that. I actually drew the original planes for that. I used crayons. I should have kept it. I'd be an NFT today, but I did the original drawings with Peter Diamandis on that. But also with, space shuttle launches, they only happen weather permitting. So flying car racing means that no matter what the weather is, I could schedule a race from Anchorage to Seattle, December 23rd, departing at 12:17 in the afternoon. 100% probability we're going to race. I don't care if there's blizzards, hurricanes. If we can't fly, we're going to drive. If we drive and we hit an ice pack, we're going to fall off the road. It'll be really fun to watch. So that's what I learned from Craig. Weather permitting equals trouble.
Adam, is this what it's like meeting Dezso at a party and you're just off and running, if talking about racing leagues going from Anchorage to Seattle and inspiration and...
Yes, this is what it's like. The life with Dezso is like, you just gotta roll with it.
I love how you refer to him as one of your candidates for most interesting man in the world. Do you, having spent now so much time on this article with him, stand by that?
Oh yeah, for sure. I've got some others. Check out the next issue of Alta, but he's definitely one of them.
Dezso, can you talk a little bit about who some of your inspirations are?
Jacques Cousteau, who invented scuba gear and went swimming rather than opening a scuba shop and staying home and dealing with customer support from angry Saudi sheikhs who didn't like the bubbles sound. Okay, so he was not an oceanographer. He said, look, I was a filmmaker. I'm not a filmmaker, but he was. He has a Palme d'Or and everything. Another person, probably someone like Hobie Alder, who maybe you haven't heard of, but Hobie skateboards and things. He was simply a little bit ahead of the world technologically, where he was making surfboards out of fiberglass and skateboards and things. So it was a lot of fun stuff that let people, that he was able to use. And he was just kind of a California guy who sold, flowery t-shirts until his last days. But he was very, very brilliant cat in using existing technology that was slightly ahead of the curve. Probably the factory of Andy Warhol, where he's an artist and just has people that work with him. And I love collaborating. And that's what a racing team is. It's a collaboration. And you're able to just rapidly do things and turn them out in the way you like without having these long-winded challenges. And so I'll just say that finishing this story was a climb for myself and the people who helped me. I'm not a one-man band. I mean, Craig Calfee and Leon Warner and a lot of these people, they really struggled to help me. But we've done projects before, so they know that like I can dip into their favor bucket and they know I will be there and I'll pay it back and I'll help them with their stuff. I really like to help people with their stuff. And so that's what's happening now. But I will just say that those folks I think are pretty relevant to what I want to do. We want to build machines and travel with them and try to inspire people and sort of move the needle a little bit towards something that's sustainable.
Ed asks, can you say or reveal, is this technology that I think that he means that you're using for the Streetwing similar to what people are doing with EV conversions of classic cars put into an aerodynamic design / vehicle?
Is it a classic car design?
Is the technology similar to what people are doing with EV conversions of classic cars? Electric vehicle,
No, again, this is a weight reduction experiment. Classic cars are big and heavy. So the simple rule is a bicycle costs about $1,000 a pound. An airplane is about $400 a pound, and cars cost about the same as cheese, like $3 or $4 a pound. So as long as we're stuffing big, wide pieces of steel up mountain roads, we're not getting anywhere. And also cars are designed to be built from the inside out. They're not designed to be taken apart. It's very difficult to replace the little light behind your speedometer. Try to get to that, right? So airplanes are extremely modular and bicycles are modular. You can get to the parts, you can change them, you can put them back. And as a result, Adam was out, I think when you came to Whiteman, I said, look, half the planes there were built in the 60s and 70s. These are 60, 70, 80-year-old planes that people are still using today because they realize they're able to change the things and fix them and continue using them, and they're still good. So no, the Streetwing is not just a throwback. It's the idea is that we're trying to change the paradigm about how much equipment people have to push down the road and how much air they have to shove out of the way in order to do it.
Giving me a lot to think about. I hope it's true for everyone else. Adam, can I, as we start to kind of wrap up with this, and again, I'm going to be grabbing links to all of this and emailing everyone, because we've discussed a lot today. But Adam, with this article that is so fascinating, is there anything that you want that landed on the cutting room floor that you really wanted, that want us to know that didn't make it into the print magazine?
Oh, gosh. No, I had such a great experience. I handed in an article that was twice the assigned length, and everybody loved it. And I don't think they cut anything important. So it was just a wonderful experience to be able to just lay it all out.
He did it really fast too. Yeah, I only gave you what, 3 days?
Yeah.
4 days?
A couple days. Yeah, that was rough, but.
Adam, will you be competing in the Flying Car Racing League?
That's so funny you mentioned that. I have ambitions to learn how to fly and compete in at least the inaugural league. I think, maybe that's a good first chapter or last chapter of a book.
Is this a book? Is this story?
Maybe. It could be. I mean, I hope so, because it's one of the funnest I've done. But it would just thrill me to be able to race. I know the guy who runs the race, and he's 2 thumbs up for my ambitions.
Great.
Adam's a burner. Adam's a Burning Man veteran, so I think he understands the aesthetic of making the effort to build something and taking it out to the desert and trashing it.
Yeah.
Well, I hope if you're going to write a book about this, then we'll have to send someone else from Alta to cover the first ever, if you do it on the West Coast.
Oh no, experiential journalism. I will definitely write it for someone.
I also want to throw out that the Streetwing being finished is not a prerequisite to have a race. The idea of the race is that there's an installed base. There are hundreds of flying cars in the world. A lot of them are in museums. I'm not saying I have to wait till this thing's done. I'm just saying that the idea is that we want people to bring what they have, rather than treating these inventors as failures because they made something work. Look, Terrafugia just took a nosedive. This is some guys out of MIT. Their cars never come into market, but they built one. And the idea is that these things need a gallery. And then once that we start using them, rather than just talking about, well, we need to determine at what point the investors are going to exit, because no, forget that. Let's just use these things and click that first thing, which is they do exist. And then once they do exist, it's like, well, maybe they could be applied. Maybe we could use them. So just to say that to Beth, Beth, your statement earlier was that we'll be a race afterward. No, I just want that to happen soon. I want something to drive the interest.
Well, I look forward to watching from afar. The safety of Earth. With that, I want to, before everyone, we're out of time, unfortunately. But before everyone goes, I really want to thank both of our guests, Dezso, Adam. Thank you so much for taking the time for this and for availing yourselves, your inventions, your time, your bravery for this incredible article and for taking the time to speak with us today. And for everyone who's here, I just thank you for turning in. Again, if you're late to the party, it's all recorded. I'm going to email you this whole thing later this afternoon. Tomorrow night, California Book Club is hosting Miriam Gerba, author of Mean. That's at 5 o'clock. Going to send you a link to that. And next week, Alta Live will virtually take another flight with the California condor, the once nearly extinct in the wild California condor, with Kelly Sorensen and Alta contributor Joy Lansendorfer. So that will be fun as well. 12:30 Wednesday, April 21st, right here on Zoom. A big thank you again to our guests, to everyone for coming. Stay safe. And I think we're all very inspired to go invent things now. So thank you guys both very much. It was really fun talk.
Thanks, Beth.
Take care.
Thank you.